Hello, this is a special edition of Jim's Allotment Garden. It's not absolutely associated with the garden, but as you've known, I've put out quite a few videos showing me building stuff for the allotment out of recycled materials, wood, metal, etc. And I don't always show all of the steps. I just kind of say, you know, I've put this here and this here, and you'll see most of the steps, but you know, some of the things I've kind of assumed are obvious to you know, to most people. But what I have had is some comments with regard to people who haven't done it for a while and would like a little big more detail. So this episode isn't exactly about gardening as such. What it's about is using a MIG welder. Because I haven't shown any of that. I've just said I'm going to put this together and weld this. So this episode is a special short episode to explain to you, if you haven't done it for a while or if you haven't done it before, how to use a MIG welder. It's not that complicated if you follow some easy steps, which I'll explain in a moment. But I'm self-taught. I've never been officially trained how to use a MIG welder, and I can use arc welders, MIG welders. I've used acetylene torches. I've used plasma cutters, and I've never been trained to use any of them. It's just equipment that I've either had or had the access to that I've been able to use to do various things. And it's not exactly intuitive how to use it if you've not used it before, but with a MIG welder, which I'm going to explain in the next section, it's all about the setup. If you can set the MIG welder up, all you've got to do then is just point it at wherever you want to weld and press the button. It is simple as that. If you're thinking of buying a welder, I would most certainly consider buying a MIG welder rather than any other type, because they're the easiest to use for the the kind of stuff that I've been doing, and they're not that expensive really when you think about how much use and ability it'll give you to make things. My MIG welder I've had for some years now. I've had it for probably about 13, 14 years, and when I bought it back in the day, it was probably around 150, 180 pounds. Now a similar welder is going to be around 200, 250 pounds, depending on where you go. But there are cheaper versions. I've got a sort of reasonably large powered one. Because of the type of welding that I do. I have had, this is the third MIG welder that I've had, as I've explained before, and really, if you are going to do it, I would strongly suggest you get a reasonable sized one, because the smaller ones don't, you always seem to have problems with them. And if you are serious about it, it's well worth you investing the money, and it is an investment because my welders pay dividends. You know, obviously it's a big initial cost, but as soon as you've got it, it's well worth doing. I would strongly recommend you buy a new one. Don't buy a second-hand one, because if you don't use them properly, they can get a bit abused, and the winding mechanism, which we'll explain anyway, can get damaged. And you're much better off starting with a new one, a known quantity. If you look after it, it'll look after you. Same with everything else. So this next few clips are going to be how to use a MIG welder step by step. Just to show you the basics and how to set it up, and then how to weld. And if you follow these steps, it is really quite easy, to be honest with you. And it's, if things go wrong, it's knowing what setting on it is wrong. And this comes with experience a little bit. But if I explain to you how I do it and you follow them steps, it really is ABC. So welcome to another episode of Jim's Allotment Garden. Jim's Garden, Jim's Garage. Okay, so this is my MIG Welder, and it's made by Clark's, as you can see there, and it's a 150 TE turbo weld. Now you can purchase these quite readily from Machine Mart. The reason I bought this from Machine Mart, and the reason why I've got Clark's, is that I know that I can get all of the parts and the gas and all the other bits and bobs, which I'll come on to in a moment, quite easily just by going down to Machine Mart and buying it. It's reasonably cheap to buy. You can also get them over on eBay or other internet outlets, but to be honest with you, if you go to Machine Mart, they're pretty much the same price as everywhere else, so it's easy to you know, sort of just buy them from there. Really, the only consumables that you have are the tips, which are these things here, which sit at the end. This is where the wire feeds out, which I'll show you in a moment. There's a shroud which fits over there, which I'll show you in a moment, and the gas, and then obviously the wire, which I'll come on to in a moment. So the gas that I use is a mixture. Well, this one's actually just carbon dioxide, but I also use a carbon dioxide argon mix. But these ones are just carbon dioxide. That cylinder sits at the back there, and one of these cylinders will last me quite a few months. You know, up to a year this will last me. So there's quite a lot of carbon dioxide in there. They're about £12 to buy, and that will last me. I don't know, obviously depending on how much welding I do, but that'll last me about 12 months or so. The wire that I buy, which is inside this part here, so I'll just get that out the way. These drums of wire here are about £20 to buy, and that will last me for absolutely years. I think the last one lasted me for about 6 years, and you know how much welding I do. These tips are a couple of pounds, and the shroud which goes over the end, again, a couple of pounds. So these things are quite easy, and you know, to get hold of, and cheap as well. So I recommend you get Clark's, because they're a good brand, and you can easily get the parts and everything else for them, at least in the UK. I'm not quite sure about the US. So, setting it up. If I can just quickly explain how it works. You've got a reel of wire here, which is obviously steel wire. It's got a copper plate on there, just to stop it from corroding whilst it's on the drum. That feeds through this device here. So I've got a wheel here that turns around, and as you can see in there, the wire's just inside there, and that's like a toothed wheel. So when I run the welder, that will wind round, and it'll push the wire from this reel down the pipe to the end here. So when I press the button, you'll see the wire coming out there. So I'll just quickly turn it on and show you that. So as I press the button on, all I'm doing is just pressing the trigger on the welder. As I'm pressing the button, you'll see that the wire will move, which is then pushing the wire out. And if I show you at this end here, there's the wire coming out of the tip. If I press the trigger again, you'll see that the wire feeds out, and that's the metal that you're forming the weld with. So before you do that, what you need to do is set up the gas. You don't need the gas to be very fast. This is a mistake that most people make. All you need is a little teeny bit of gas, because what you're doing is you're creating like an inert cloud around where your weld is, so you're not oxidising the steel. So I'm just going to put the shroud back on. These tips here, they just unscrew, as you can see there. So if you need to replace that at any time, you just quickly unscrew it with your fingers, assuming it's not too hot. Put a new one in, and away you go. The shroud goes over there. The gas comes out of these little holes at the side there, which is fed down another pipe from the cylinder of gas over here. Never try to weld without gas, because the weld won't be very strong at all. Now, all I need to do is turn the gas on, just with this little valve at the top, and you don't need a lot. Hang on, it's not coming out yet. Slightly more in there. Yep, hang on. So, if you can, I'm just going to put the tip of the welder and do this whilst the power's off, because if you press the trigger and the wire starts coming out, it's going to go in your ear. I'm speaking from experience now. So if you can hear this, that's actually a bit too high. So you only need it so it sounds like that. you can barely hear the gas flame. What you should get is when you press the trigger, you should just get like a tss, but you don't get like a constant, it just goes tss, like that. Can you hear? So that's how the gas should sound. So as soon as you've got the gas set up, pretty much all you've got to do then is turn it on and away you go. So what I'm going to do now is just very quickly go through the safety things that you need to think about before you start welding. So one very important point, when you're welding, from the actual weld or the flame that you get coming out of here, which is an arc flame, the light which is emitted from that is exactly like the sun. If you don't cover yourself up, you will get almost like sunburnt. So what you need to do is make sure your hands and your arms are covered, and obviously your face, and you cover your face with obviously a welding mask. This is a welding mask with a reactive lens in it, but you can have fixed lenses, which is just like a coloured piece of glass which you can put in there. But that basically allows me to see normally, and then as soon as the weld starts, it'll react and go dark, just like reactive sunlight sunglasses. So I can't stress enough, make sure all of your face, your hands and your arms are covered, and obviously the rest of your body's covered from the light that this emits. If you don't do it, you will get sunburnt. More importantly, if you don't cover your eyes, what you can get is something called arc eye, which is, it feels like you've got grit in your eyes. And I've had it once, and trust me, you would never do it again. It is really painful, and it's going to take you a couple of days to get over it. So make sure you've got a good quality mask. It's more important than a good quality welder. So make sure you've got one of these on your face before you start welding. So we're almost ready to go. We've got the gas set up on here. Now the settings on the actual welder, these settings here are basically the power of it. More often than not, I've got it on 1. You know, you don't really need it. The only time you need it on sort of 2 or 3 is really if you're welding really thick steel, like when I was welding the grid for the drainage, I had it on 3. This button here again is power. And dependent on the welder you buy, there'll be different settings here, but basically you don't need it, or at least this one, you don't need it on too powerful. I always have it on 1 and on max. If I'm welding a bit thicker stuff and I want to get more heat in there, what I will do is you know, sort of turn it over to 3 or sort of 2 or 3. The other dial that you need to be thinking about is this one here, and to be honest with you, this is why I don't bother with these too much, because I control my welding with the wire. Now this is the speed at which this feeds the wire through to the tip. So if I'm welding something that's reasonably big, I'll have it down at sort of 3 or 4 on setting 1. If I'm welding something that's a bit thicker, a bit thinner, what I will do is increase the speed of the wire. Now, the reason I'm doing this is if I've got it down at 3 or 4, the wire's going reasonably slowly, there's more flame than metal, so it's going to get hot. If the metal's thinner, you want the wire speed to be higher, so you're depositing more metal, but it doesn't get so hot. If you do a weld, which I'm going to show you in a minute, and the weld is sitting on top of the metal, it's not getting hot enough. You haven't got any penetration into the metal. That's when you need to turn this down. If you're welding a piece of metal and you're finding you're burning holes in it, that's when you need to turn this up, and that's as simple as it gets. So set it nominally, I don't know, somewhere around 4.5 is where I always start. Have a try the weld. If you find that the weld is sitting on the metal, reduce it. If you find that you're burning holes in the metal, increase it. And it's no more complicated than that. So we're ready to go. What I'm going to do is position the camera on a piece of metal, and I'm going to put this in front of the camera, and hopefully you'll be able to see the weld in progress. Obviously, when that's in front of the camera, you can't see anything in normal light, but as soon as the light starts from the welder, you should see it. So I'm hoping you'll be able to see what I'm doing. The other real quick pointer is if you're ever welding metal, make sure the metal's clean. So not only, you know, sort of not only that the metal is sort of free from rust and paint and stuff like that, but also what you don't want is any grease or any oil or dirt or anything on the metal, because the weld won't work very well. So the best way to weld is make sure that the metal is perfectly clean. Get an angle grinder or a sandpaper, or a linisher of some kind, and make sure that you're working with clean metal, and then the weld will be nice and clean. So we've got a nice clean piece of steel. I'm not going to try and stick two pieces together. All I'm going to do is weld straight onto the surface there, just to show you as a demonstration. Obviously this is electric, so it's electric circuit. You need to complete the circuit. So the one bit I haven't explained is there's a ground crocodile clip, which then just completes the circuit back to the welder. So make sure your ground is on, gas is flowing, and you're about the right settings on there. So as soon as you start the welder, so we're just pressing on now. I don't know if you can hear that, but there's a bit of a fan in there just to keep the coils inside the welder cool. So I'll now start to do a weld along here, but I'll obviously have to put the green, the dark glass in front of the camera, so you don't get blinded by the lights coming from it. Okay, so I'm just going to weld now. So I haven't got gloves on, but this is because I know what I'm doing. I'm not going to be doing this for long. So this is the welder going now. And as you can see from that, I've deposited this weld on here. Now, I know that that's set right, because if you can look at the weld from this side, you can see it's got reasonably good penetration. It's hot on the other side. It's actually gone through to the other side. I don't know if you can see that. No, there's not enough light, but it's actually gone through to the other side, and so that's a good weld. And then if you're welding bits of thin steel like this, what I suggest you do is do a weld like that, spot it, and then do another one below it, and so on like that, and work your way down, putting spots on. Now, if you listen to the sound of the welder whilst I'm doing it, I'm just going to put the cover back over. Listen to the sound. So that's what the weld should look like, and on the other side, obviously, as you can see, it has penetrated because I'm getting the heat and the weld through to the other side. So that's really what you should be looking for. Now, as I explained, just when you're welding, you should be aiming to what you're actually welding should be around sort of ½ inch away. So you should be doing something like that. Rest the welder on the piece that you're welding, and try and aim so you're welding about ½ inch away from where you're actually. So if you imagine, if I just quickly turn this on, so I haven't got the ground on, so it's not going to work, but if you imagine the wire comes out to there, that's kind of where you should be welding, or slightly closer like that. If you weld too close, what you'll get is a load of debris going up inside there, and you could potentially get the wire to weld to the actual tip in there. If that happens, which is probably why it's better to do it in little shots like this rather than doing a continuous weld, if you're not used to it. What you can get is the tip welding itself to the wire. If that's the case, just get a small screwdriver and just flick it off. Let it go cool and flick it off, and then you'll be fine. You can carry on. If you're unlucky, what will happen is the winder in here will carry on going if you keep the trigger going, and the wire will wind up in here. At that point, you need to basically cut the wire and then rethread it up the pipe that takes it up to the trigger. The way to do this, and obviously this is the same thing when you're putting on a new reel or whatever on your welder. What you need to do is take off the shroud and take off the tip. So you've just got the the empty part that just literally unscrews like I showed you earlier. Then put the sort of the pipework in a straight line to help the wire going up. Cut the wire off cleanly with a pair of wire cutters, and with a little bit of sandpaper, just make sure that the edges aren't sharp, because if you leave a sharp edge, what can happen is it'll break through the pipe and sort of come out over here, if you like. So you want the wire to go all the way up the pipe, so keep this in a nice straight line like this, so it'll go all the way up the pipe and reach the end before it so it doesn't come out there. As soon as you've done that, setting this, and this is the crux of all MIG welders here, this is why I got a large one, so I've got a good mechanism here. The smaller ones have a not so good design. This wheel here has got some, like, I don't know if you can see the detail, but in there's a groove that the wire sits in, and in that groove it's like serrated, so it grabs onto the wire. Now, when you're welding, it should be like you know, like you're cooking bacon. It should be a constant sound, like that. If you're getting it so it's intermittent, it goes, the wire's slipping here. If that's the case, what you need to do is, there's just a roller bearing there which pushes the wire down onto this drive wheel here. So that goes down there. Now this part here is the tensioning part. If you're getting like that, you need to tighten this up so that the wheel's sort of grabbing the wire properly. If you tighten this up to the point where it's still not grabbing, the chances are, and if it's an old welder, that this wheel here needs to be replaced. Or in fact the whole mechanism. So when you're setting it up, for the first time, put the wire through. Obviously as soon as you've got it set up, you don't need to bother doing this again, but put the wire through, as I've explained, thread it all the way through till it's coming out of the at the end. Oh, I've got a little friend here. Hello, Billy. Say hello, Billy.
Hello.
The wire comes through into the pipe here, through, obviously you've got this up at the time, feed it through into the pipe there, and then it goes all the way out to the end. As soon as you've done that, now you need to set this tensioner. Put that tension down onto the wire, making sure that the wire's in the groove, and put your tensioner on like that, and then loosen that off. And then put one hand on here, your left hand on here, and your right hand on there, obviously if you're right-handed. Pull the trigger on there, and then you should see the wire coming out constantly. If it's not coming out constantly, or not at all, then tighten this up slowly until the wire comes out constantly. As soon as it's coming out constantly, check the weld, because obviously as you're welding, you're actually pushing the wire in. If it still comes out constantly, then you've got it right. If it's still going rather than, you know, actually all the time, you need to tighten that up very slightly. It's better to have this too loose than too tight. If you've got it too tight, what will happen is you smooth off the serrated bit in there, and then it won't work properly. So this is the crux of it all here, getting this set up. So start off slack, completely unwind this, and then put that on. Then that will apply the right pressure to the wire going in here. The wire should then come out of the end constantly. If the wire doesn't come out constantly, then you tighten this up slowly until it does, and then stop. Then that's the setting that's right for this gauge of wire. Wire comes in two main gauges. I always use 0.6 gauge wire, and obviously you need 0.6 gauge tips to do that. It can also come in 0.8 gauge, and obviously you need 0.8 gauge tips for that. But I find that 0.6 is more than okay for the type of welding that I do. If you're welding a lot bigger stuff, it's probably better that you go for 0.8. But that's the wire. If you're not going to use the welder for any length of time, and you haven't got it in a dry place, this wire can become corroded, and what you get is the wire sticking at the tip, and this problem where you get it welding onto itself. That's because the wire's dirty. So if that's the case, either take the reel off altogether and put it in a plastic bag and put it somewhere dry, or at least cover the bag with plastic to stop this from getting wet. Because if this wire goes rusty, it's effectively scrap, and you need to get yourself a new reel. And also, because these are £15, you don't want to be doing that. So if you're not going to use your welder for any length of time, put a plastic bag over this part here, and then put your welder somewhere nice and dry and warm, so that's not going to go rusty. So onto the tips. This is this shroud part here. I've had this for 12 years. That's the second one that's been on here, so that should last you, you know, sort of quite some time. I think the first one was on about 8 years, and to be honest with you, I didn't really need to change it, but I changed it because whilst I was at Machine Mart, I bought a new one. The tips themselves in there, that tip that's in there at the moment has been in there for about 4 months, and I've done a reasonable amount of welding. So if you look after it and you've got it set up right, your tips should last quite a long time. So even though you get sort of a pack of 5, those should last you for 12 months, if not more, if you're doing a reasonable amount of welding. So if you're going through tips more often than that, if a tip isn't lasting you a couple of months, you know, with the kind of amount of welding that I'm doing, and I'm using this welder quite often, then most certainly you need to be looking at your settings on the wire and how close you are with your tip to the weld. If you're too close, then obviously the tips are going to get hot, that's going to wear them out. And also, if your wire's not feeding properly, that's also going to potentially wear them out, and you're going to get the wire sticking on there. So that's the wire. The other thing is as I explained, that when you're welding, it should sound like bacon cooking. You get that zzz sort of crackling sound. If the crackling sound is too loud, typically what that means is the wire's being fed too quickly for what you're doing. If you're getting more of a sort of a flame sort of sound, what you need to do is increase the speed, because you're getting more of a flame than a weld. So what you need to do is increase the speed of your wire. Okay, those are pretty much the tips that you need to use a MIG welder. As I say, the sort of the diamond points, the bits that you really must do, is whatever you're welding must be clean. No paint, dirt, oil or anything like that. Obviously set up the wire feed and everything as I explained. Set up your gas exactly as I've explained. And then obviously all you've got to do then is just adjust your settings dependent on how thick your metal is. And as I've explained, if the weld's sort of too proud and it's not penetrating, your wire's too fast, so you need to turn your speed down. If you're finding that you're melting the hole in the piece of metal, what you need to do is increase the speed slightly, so you're depositing more metal and you're getting less heat in there. And then within that kind of sweet spot, if you like, where you've got you're melting the metal and you're depositing sort of too much weld on there, if you go outside of that, that's when you start to get the sound of the sort of, if the wire's too slow, it starts going like that, and then if it's too fast, you're getting more of a sort of sound, and you can feel the welder tip is being pushed away because the wire speed's too quick. That is literally the basics of a MIG welder. Obviously, make sure you've got your gas going, not too fast. You only need a little bit. If you have it going too fast, that's not going to be a problem for your weld. However, you're going to use your bottle of gas really quickly, and as these are sort of 12-13 pounds each, you don't want to be going through one of them every week. Your wire and everything like that, you know, just look after it, make sure you've got a plastic over it. And this thing here, I can't stress it enough, that's the crux of everything. If you get that set up right, you'll only ever need to do it once. As soon as you've set that screw on there, you know, it'll work forever quite happily like that. If you have got a second-hand one or an older one and you find that the wire's not being set easily, what you need to do is change this wheel for another one. And obviously, if you change the wire on here, you will also need to change this wheel. So if you're putting 8.8 wire onto the welder, you'll need a 0.8 wheel. If you're using 0.6 like me, you'll have a 0.6 wheel on there. You do get some wheels which do both, but just make sure you've got the right wheel for the gauge of wire that you've got, and you'll be okay. So that's the basics of using a MIG welder. So I hope this episode has been of some use to you. I know it's not gardening in its truest sense, but I thought it was a worthwhile video to put out there to help people. You know, if you want to start making the things that I've been making over the last few months or the last few years, you know, that you see in the allotment. So please do put your comments. Please subscribe to the channel. Thank you to everybody who's been commenting and has already subscribed to the channel. I do appreciate your support, and I will see you on the next episode of Jim's Allotment Garden.